High class, in the Mediterranean, the Greeks arise on the fringe of Persia's empire, where for the most part they resisted the empire's claims to their islands and lands. In 499 BCE, Greek city-states joined with other Mediterranean peoples to revolt against the Persians, called the Ionian Revolt. Now, the Persians put that revolt down pretty quickly, but in 490 BCE, the Persian invasion of the Greek mainland was repulsed at the Battle of Marathon. Only 192 Greeks lost their life, but more than 5,000 Persians died, in part thanks to the incredible hoplite Greek soldiers and their brutal phalanx formation. After this humiliating defeat, Darius asked for a bow. He placed an arrow on the string, and as he discharged it to the heavens, he said, "Zeus, grant me to take vengeance upon the Athenians." And he's also said to have charged one of his servants to say to him every day before dinner 3 times, "Master, remember the Athenians." Now, Athens emerges in this period as a major sea power employing the advanced technology of the trireme battleships. In 480, the failed Battle of Thermopylae takes place between the Spartan king Leonidas and Xerxes, son of Darius, who's now in power, when Persia comes in to invade Greece. It's also known as the Battle of 300, but later, in the Battle of Salamis, the naval force repulsed the Persian invasion, part of a long pattern of Persia losing ground to the Greeks, and soon the Greeks even began to expand into Persian territory. And this is a picture of the trireme ship that was so incredible and used by the Athenians to their advantage over the Persians. Also on the Imperial Fringe, if you want to call it that, is a group known as the Canaanites in the Bible, the Phoenicians, to use the Greek term. They were an important maritime people in the Eastern Mediterranean. They lived in present-day Lebanon, and these people specialized in opening new markets to trade. Rather than subduing foreign people, they just went to trade. They maintained the autonomy of their smaller territory by supplying exotic luxury products to the Neo-Assyrian kings and the Persians from their ideal seat on the sea. They could both build ships from the large inland cedar forests and trade the cedar, which was a very precious commodity at the time. They were also successful because of their innovations in shipbuilding and seafaring, which enabled them to trade across the southern and western rims of the sea, where they developed ports that they could ship inland products. And they were able to compete with the Greeks in this large space, and from the 8th century BCE forward, they employed an alphabet, which significantly simplified communication among educated people who would no longer need to depend on scribes. But they were best known, class, for the incredible purple dye they created from a snail called the murex. It was so costly that only kings and wealthy nobles could afford garments dyed with it. The color purple is still associated with royalty today. And there's a map of the region where they resided. To the south of the Phoenicians, between the sea and the desert, the Israelites, class, are going to emerge as another micro-society coming in contact with these big empires. The Israelites extend to the borderlands with Egypt, and their stories of their people emphasize their origins in the Mesopotamia, starting with Abraham, who is considered the father of Judaism. A local culture emerged in this present-day Israel between 1200 and 1000 BCE, leading to a kingdom under David from 1000 to 960 BC and his son and successor Solomon from 960 to 930 BCE. This was based around a great temple. Their society was based around a great temple to their one true, omnipresent, omniscient God, Yahweh. Now, unfortunately, Israel broke into 2 kingdoms during a civil war after Solomon's death. However, this is a period in which their belief cements and moved to monotheism. It's going to be led by a series of prophets who assert the new faith and spread the news. The Torah emerges as a collection of books that served as a contract between the believers and their one true God, including the Ten Commandments God gave Moses. This is going to have a lasting impact as Jewish people migrated across Afro-Eurasia. According to scholars, this is the first true monotheistic society and the first intervention of religion into private behavior of humans. Now, let's move our way into India and give another layer of society there. We've talked a good bit about India already, but let's talk a little bit more about them. So we had already talked about the Vedic people that settled into these agrarian communities, the Aryans, which had social structures that were more complex and hierarchical, and they're going to base it on ownership of land or lack thereof. Now, these Vedic people, the Aryans, they did have a Raja or a princely ruler, but to categorize social groups, they're going to break it into using 4 varna or color were used. First up is the Brahmins. They were the priestly caste, ranked the highest. Kshatriya were the warriors who controlled the land. Vaishya, who worked land and tended livestock and also included a growing merchant class. And then the Shudras, of non-Vedic lineage, were laborers or slaves in the field without ownership of land. The Brahmins and the warriors had a reciprocal relationship, as the former performed rituals that turned warriors into kings, and the warriors in turn gave gifts and prestige to the Brahmins. Jati is the ranking and groupings within the caste system, and later another group will emerge in this system of social hierarchy, and it's called the untouchables. They're going to handle work no one else will do. Not much movement between the caste system, and exists class in some form today in India. Also, I've got a video pulled into Canvas in this module, and you can take a look a little bit more at this caste system that exists today. Though transmitted by Brahmins, Vedic culture served to unite different people through a shared language of Sanskrit, belief in common gods, shared cultural symbols that we've talked about, and collective Vedic identity. And this culture is going to be passed down through oral traditions. Brahmins led ritual practices that included support for the hereditary leaders, which included the Brahmins memorizing the 4 main Vedic works, the Vedas. Remember, we've talked about that. But around the middle of the first millennium, some Brahmin ascetics expanded the Vedic tradition with the Upanishads. These are new teachings in the form of dialogues between a disciple and a sage or guru that sought to respond to unanswered questions. We're asking hard questions. These texts that represent blending of Aryan and older Dravidian traditions was composed around 800 to 400 BCE to reveal the truth of life. The Upanishads is considered the end of the Vedas. It is among the most important literature in the history of India, and it plays an important role in development of spiritual ideas that make the transition from the bloody Aryan Vedic rituals that we've talked about of sacrifice into a new way of thinking. Now, a major component of this is going to be the concept of Atman, an eternal being that exists everywhere and in all people and creatures, which guarantees that souls transmigrate into other beings after physical death. Samsara is the process of that reincarnation, continuing cycle where a soul is born over and over. Karma, y'all say that a lot. Kids do. It's the sum of a person's actions decide fate for future existence. Moksha is the liberation seeking freedom from burdens of life and reincarnation. Also included in the Upanishads were rituals and chants of yoga found here to cultivate discernment, self-regulation, and a higher consciousness. So yoga's been around for a while, class. And finally, I want to talk just a little bit about the Zhou dynasty. And why do I want to talk about the Zhou dynasty? It is one of China's longest lasting empires. It is among the most culturally significant of early Chinese dynasties. It's divided into two periods, but we're going to talk a minute about this early Western Zhou Empire that existed from about 1046 to 771 BCE. Now, King Wu's army of 45,000 troops and superior weapon and crossbows and tactics defeats the ruling Shang state that we've talked about in 1045 BCE. After which, Zhou innovations in politics and agriculture and society organization better integrated the empire. The Zhou copied the Shang patrimonial state based on ancestor worship, but for 8 centuries, they're going to rule with father to son, and this power continues to pass down through the male lineage with 31 Zhou kings in all. The Zhou Empire expanded from northwest China to colonize some new lands in other directions by rewarding allegiance to their empire by giving them land. And usually these would take the form of garrison towns surrounded by farm workers, and in return the regional lords would supply military forces and pay tribute and loyalty to the emperor. As they expanded, the Zhou dynasty made new agricultural advances with wooden and then iron plows, field rotations, as well as constructions of things like canals and irrigation systems that can control the flooding. Remember the Yellow River. Canals are going to serve to interconnect the north, where wheat and millet is produced, to the south, where rice was grown. So that's going to be very important. As in other empires to the west, the Zhou justified their conquest of the Shang and expansion of their rule with a concept of divine sanction, here in the form of the mandate of heaven. It maintains that the ruler is in a contract with the heavens to uphold harmony and honor on earth, and that if a ruler fails in this duty, they'll lose their authority and power. Now, the Book of Odes was written during this time, and it's an important collection of poetry dating from 1000 to 600 BCE. These are believed to be the oldest existing examples of Chinese poetry, and the Book of Odes was considered one of the 5 Confucian classics. I think Confucius wrote them all down, and became a basic text in Chinese education. For many centuries, the Chinese have studied the text for its wisdom relative to history, philosophy, and politics. The Zhou Empire peaks under King Mu from 956 to 918 BCE, and in part because of the incredible canal that he built and finished and added to, linking the north and the south, promoting trade and greater unity. Class, the Grand Canal is the longest canal or artificial river in the world, linking the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. The total length of the Grand Canal is 1,104 miles, and incredibly is still in use today. As usual, keep in touch.